Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Nick Drewe. I'm one of the directors here at Market Dojo. I used to be a procurement consultant where I managed many hundreds of reverse auctions, and very much looking forward to sharing some of the stories of those today. And then here at Market Dojo, we've probably overseen thousands and thousands of auctions as well. So yeah, really enjoying this. And I would like to introduce with me today is Jacob Gorm Larsen, the Director of Digital Procurement at Maersk, and the author of the Practical Guide to eAuctions for Procurement, which is an absolute must-read book for anyone that wishes to set up an eSourcing Centre of Excellence on a world-class and award-winning level. So I'd just say hi, Jacob. How are you doing?
Hi Nick, I'm doing good, and I'm really happy to be here, and I look forward to the discussion we'll have here on anecdotes on eAuctions. I've actually been looking forward to this event because I think we'll have a lot of fun.
We certainly shall. We certainly shall. It's going to be really interesting. We're doing a completely different format today. There's no slides, no sort of graphs and all that kind of thing. What we're doing, and you can hopefully see on your screen there. We're doing a nice sort of virtual fireside chat, which is back when we had this idea, it was cold, it was wintry. Maybe now it's more summer and quite warm. It perhaps should have been more appropriate to do a poolside chat, or maybe even a beachside with a few virtual pina coladas in front of us.
But we'll do that next time.
Next time, definitely. Hopefully not even virtual next time. We've got a little wheel there that will bring up some questions at random, or some topics at random that Jacob and I will discuss, all about reverse auctions. And we'll try and do it in such a way that will offer some practical advice and something that everyone can take away with them, rather than just anecdotes. And so let's get going. Let's see, first up on our list, if we give this a go, we have eAuction fail and why. Interesting, controversial topic to begin with. So maybe Jacob, do you want to take us away on that one first, and I'll come up with my own.
I could probably talk the entire hour about that, because actually it's an interesting topic. But because of course we've done more than 10,000 auctions while I've been on board here, and of course we've seen a number of failures as well. Auctions is not a guarantee for double-digit savings, and sometimes you just get the strategy wrong, and then you have a failure. So very often when we see failures, it has to do with us not prepping well enough, not really analyzing and understanding the market well enough that we are operating in. And I remember I can mention a couple of examples, but let me mention one specific one, which was, well, it's many years back. It was for taxi services in a large European city. It was supposed to be a free market, but obviously or clearly it wasn't, and we learned that the hard way. So all suppliers actually took part in the training and submitted quotes, etc. But when we came to the actual auction, we got one bid in the auction from the incumbent at the current price. So clearly we had not understood how well aligned the market was in that situation, and that's unfortunate, because of course we should never have done an auction in such a situation. So that's one example. And if I can mention another example where we didn't get it right, it would be so we've used auctions to sell off a lot of real estate throughout the years. So actually not procurement auctions where price go down, but more traditional auctions where we sell it and then forward auctions. And the value add, in my experience, when we've done a real estate auction, comes a lot from this common value that is also one of the themes of the book, that bidders learn about how other bidders are valuating the assets during the process. And a couple of times, and I think it's 2 times that we've done it, I've not been particularly happy with either of them, but a couple of times we've applied then forward Dutch auctions for real estate. And they've not really given the same impressive result that we've seen. And my sort of rationale after analyzing it back and forth has been that it has to do with this valuation, that a thing like a real estate deal has a relatively high private value, as it's called, as opposed to a common value estimation. So if people are not really dependent on winning the deal, and they're not really sure how other people are evaluating it, then they won't submit their very best price. And that is the case in a Dutch auction. Important to say that that doesn't mean that Dutch auctions doesn't work. It's just a matter of the market situation. So if you're in another situation where a supplier is highly dependent on a deal, for example, so a high sort of private valuation for that deal, and a Dutch auction can be extremely efficient. So again, I think we misread sort of that market also. So that's kind of the red line between failures, is that we often that we haven't prepared or analyzed the market well enough, and then those things happen.
Very interesting. No, really good examples, very practical examples, and completely agree. You know, suppliers price in that risk if they're not entirely sure of what exactly is being asked of them. We've seen it, as have you, lots of times. And no, really good examples. And you know, I think we learn a lot from our failures, I think, and it's good to have these under our belt, because you know, we can't expect success 100% of the time, but we can certainly do everything in our power to mitigate the failure. And I mean, I also have a particular failure that really came to mind, and this is back in my consulting days prior to Market Dojo, where we were working with a client who just wanted to do a very standard ranked auction on IT print consumables, you know, cartridges, toners, that kind of thing. Very commoditized market. You'd think this be a walk in the park. Unfortunately, in this case, the client did not wish to do any form of strategic sourcing exercise beforehand. And so they only wanted their 2 preferred suppliers to be invited, and no one else. So we did the right thing of getting some initial bids pre-auction, and those bids were far apart and also very uncompetitive. Clearly, the suppliers were aware that they were the only 2 being involved in the process. And so our strong advice to the client was like, do not take this to auction. You're going to undermine your leverage position. It's very unlikely to succeed. We should look at an alternative approach. Unfortunately, the client sometimes has more swing with what to do, and once they took it to auction. Embarrassingly for us, we were on site at the time of the auction, and we had these different stakeholders around the table. And the auction began, the clock started counting down, tumbleweed was rolling, no bids were placed, and I think across the entire period, I think 1 bid was received in that auction. And yeah, overwhelmingly the advice with all of this was just really do your market analysis. Like you're saying, Jake, you got to know your market. Get those qualified bidders involved. Make sure that they all have equal opportunity of winning business, of course, but just do your market assessment and listen to those warning signs. If you do see that pre-auction the bids are far apart, you don't have much options, just don't be afraid to pull the plug. Follow a different course of strategy, because that was a painful situation that I would not want to sit in again. Yeah, there we go. There's
You're touching on something which is very important also, and that's the whole stakeholder, whether it's an internal stakeholder or it's a client, as in your case, you need that alignment. And I could actually, now that you tell that story, I can recall a couple of examples where it is so obvious that during the auction that mixed messages has been sent as to when it comes to award or what we'll do after the auction, and if you don't have that alignment with the client or the internal stakeholder, it's so easy to see at the behavior also from the bidders in the auction, that they're insecure on what is happening, or maybe they're too secure actually in other situations. But I completely agree with you that alignment will lead to, or misalignment will lead to failures that of course we need to learn from. And then I'd also say that it's another thing you think that triggered a thought was that, as I also said, that auctions is not a guarantee for double-digit savings, but what you do when you do a professional auction process is that you increase the likelihood of a successful outcome of the negotiation. And of course we have failures, but you also have failures in offline negotiations. But as people have few other people to blame than themselves for, you can say, traditional negotiation failures, you often don't hear that much about them. Then they're usually put to rest, nice and quiet. But whereas you could sometimes see auction failures be communicated very actively by some stakeholders, and I've also experienced that. But that's great. Then we have another opportunity and chance to talk about auctions internally, and I'm always happy to do that. So that's good.
Fantastic. Nah, absolutely right. Yeah, I totally agree. You know, sometimes when auctions work, it's like, okay, fine, you guys were right. If they fail, it's like, told you so. But yeah, you're quite right. Traditional negotiations fail as well, but you can afford to just sweep those under the carpet and pretend it never happened. So next one up is, let's see, the most challenging category. Again, I don't know, Jake, if you want to kick us off on this one, and I'll see what I can follow up with.
Yeah, and I say you could. It of course depends on how you also look at the challenge. But I think I would go with, you know, when I consider the most challenging categories, it's really linked to sort of the nature of the category itself. It's always linked to the category manager and that mindset. So those categories that I perceive as the most challenging, that is those where you don't have, as we were just talking about, the support and the buy-in from the category owner, because it is literally impossible to run successful auctions without that active commitment. Then sometimes, and that's what we can do with internal stakeholders, you can more or less twist their arm and push them into doing it. But it often becomes a very challenging and painful process when people are doing it with the arm twisted. So over the years, for example, and it's actually funny, but we've never been really strong at doing auctions on indirect, and that is again linked to a lot of different stakeholders and a lot of challenging stakeholders in that area, which is an area which I think most companies is where they start and where they're actually doing auctions the most. But we haven't been able to fully crack that nut, and I think the challenges has to do with the stakeholder situation, if I can put it like that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because we see a lot of indirect e-auctions, and as you say, like often that is the place where people start. You know, the non-strategic, you know, sort of leverage type category. Office supplies often comes through, but you know, IT and all that kind of stuff as well. Yeah, that's interesting you say that.
And we have done it, and we still do it, of course. But I'll just say that it's a little bit of an uphill battle sometimes with that, or it has been over the years. So we do it, and then we stop, and then we do it again, and that's a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, well, interesting. I mean, yeah, for me, the most challenging category we've had, and again, this is in my former career as a consultant, was we used an e-auction to actually sell a business. I know you've done similar things on real estate and selling the HQ. I read that in your book, but yeah, this was selling a ceramics manufacturer to a tier 1 aerospace firm, and it was interesting because we had to sort of, you know, we followed the strategic sourcing process, you know, of drawing up the detailed specification of what a good buyer looks like as opposed to a supplier, going out and casting the net wide in the marketplace and building up that long list of potential candidates and qualifying them through online questionnaires and things like that to whittle it down to a short list of qualified buyers, of course, in this case, and then getting those initial offers and qualifying those offers before taking it through to an e-auction. I say challenging just because the profile of this was clearly enormous. You know, the CEO, all the board were highly involved. The risk for the buyers was much higher, you know, and well, for all parties was much higher, in that if your stationary supplier goes wrong, maybe you just switch to Amazon Business for a period of time, or Staples, or something like that. Yeah. If your sale of your entire company starts going wrong, well, that can be pretty devastating to many. But it was just interesting that the strategic sourcing process worked well, and so, you know, our advice here is just, as a procurement person, just being vigilant in your business for where the opportunities may lie, where you can practice your craft and apply your craft, because it isn't always just the direct or indirect spend. There can, and hopefully over the course of today as well, we'll have a few stories where actually you can think out the box and take the concept to new areas and new initiatives.
And I think I think you're touching on something really interesting there as well, which is another, you could say, key parameter for being successful with eAuctions. That is not to consider it as a standalone event. It has to be linked or tied in, integrated to a strategic sourcing process. So we don't do auctions because we don't want to talk to our suppliers or collaborate with them or understand their value proposition. Not at all. We do the auction as part of a strategic sourcing process to ensure we both collaborate, but also that we, and that's, you know, part of our role as being a business, that we get a good deal for ourselves, so that that competition that exists, we leverage that to get a good deal for ourselves. But it's very important not to look at it as it's a tech event standalone. It's part of an integrated strategic procurement process, and that's, again, if you do that, you'll significantly increase the likelihood of a successful outcome. And as you just proved with your example, Nick, right? If you do that, you can actually sell a business through that method. There's nothing you can't do if you have a proper process around it. So very interesting example.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we get it quite a lot. You know, oh, an auction. Oh, I'm not sure how that works. You know what? We have to do our entire process very differently, and hey, it's like, just do your standard your standard sourcing process. Just bolt this little thing on the end. I entirely agree. Let's see what's next. We have the most innovative use of eAuction. Maybe I'll kick off this one first and let you come in next. And yeah, I mean, for mine, this is maybe a little hard to describe, in that we at Market Dojo a few years ago, we did some auctions for scholarships towards children's private education, which, yeah, I mean, sounds a bit different. It was for one of the world's leading tomato ingredient processors over in the US, and this company, private company, they set aside some money each year as a fund to give grants to their employees, so they could send their child to private education. And you know, historically they could only send, I think, like 10 children a year to private education out of the amount of money that they had at their disposal. And so what they wanted to do was use an auction format where employees would bid online against one another, essentially, to help sort of get the contribution from the employees as well towards their own child's education, because some employees could actually afford to put in, say, a few $100s or $500 of their own money to go alongside the grant from the company to put their child to private education. And so the auction was used as a means to say, you know, the top 10 spots, an employee would put in a bid, and if they were within the top 10 ranks, that employee knew that they were going to get a grant, and it would be the grant plus whatever the employee committed as their own contribution. And so that was the motivation for employees to bid. You know, they would try and get themselves into that top 10 spot and get the grant. And so over the course of the auction, as more and more employees bid to get into the top 10, what happened was that the amount of money in the grant could start going further across more children because the employees were contributing enough to increase the amount. And so then it became the top 11 and then the top 12 and then it went all the way to, I think, finished up the top 14 children got to have a grant and go to private education, as opposed to just the 10 that they were able to do historically. So it was a great sort of interesting experience to just, help, a good cause and give employees that ability to send more children to private school than they would otherwise. And so, again, our advice here is keep your mind open to where the online auction format can be used for even fundraising for different initiatives, not just cost reduction. And over the years, we've seen, well, we've eAuctioned a guitar that was signed by Ed Sheeran that went to charity. We've even eAuctioned a whole load of other goods and products for a brilliant charity for child leukemia called Carter the Brave. Just getting people to bid online to win these items with all money, all proceeds going to charity. So I thought those are quite sort of innovative uses of the auction. So yeah, I'd love to hear yours as well, Jacob.
Yeah, but what a fantastic noble cause that all the good things you can actually do with eAuctions, that'll be hard to beat. Because we definitely haven't sold off any guitars that were signed by Ed Sheeran. But if I should look at innovation and eAuction, I can completely subscribe to your point. Sort of the hopefully the learning that people will take away from this is that an eAuction is not just an eAuction. There's so many ways of designing it, and that's also a key message in my book, by the way, that consider it as, again, part of a holistic process, and then there's so many variables that you can use so to make it an innovative negotiation process. But to mention a couple of examples, I say the first one is on an auction format which is not widely used. There are some practitioners using it, but that's combinatorial auctions. It's something which is widely used within the whole spectrum auction. So some of these very, very large auctions of billions and billions of dollars that governments do when they sell off spectrum licenses to companies. And it's basically taking as part of the auction, very often a prerequisite is this apple-to-apple comparison. And what you try to do with combinatorial auctions is that you, to some degree, make it possible to compare Apple with peers and still get sort of the overall best deal for the company. And one example of that, and that's actually a very recent one that my colleagues did just a few months back, but I'm absolutely fascinated and impressed with their way of doing it, is that SRM is a very important thing for us. So there's certain suppliers that we absolutely want to drive relationships with. There are certain suppliers that we don't mind doing business with, but they're not at the same sort of partnership level. There's also big and small suppliers in a lot of markets. So, for example, the trucking market, which we do a lot of sourcings in. So when we do auctions, it's not just a matter of the winner getting the business, because if that's a small trucker, he can't get the volume anyhow, or he can't handle it anyhow. So what we'll do in sort of a combinatorial auction is to upfront build in both these capacity constraints with different suppliers, but also SRM considerations, that this supplier we have a fairly close relationship with, so he can win up to this percentage. And then the feedback in the auction as suppliers were lowering their prices, competing for the business, would not be sort of the traditional rank or lead bid, but the system would optimize. So not only based on the supplier's own bid, but also comparing it to 30 other suppliers' bids, and then determine with these rules, SRM considerations, etc., how do we optimally allocate 100% of the business. And then the feedback to the suppliers is, at this price level, you're winning 12% of the volume or 12% of the contract. If you lower, or you can win more, but if the others are lowering at the same time, you may actually end up winning less. So you do a very competitive process where the system is then in real time running millions and millions of simulations and using that to provide a feedback to suppliers. In my view, that is an excellent example of what I would call a partnership auction. So an example where you can do it with suppliers that you consider strategic partners, and you take into account some of the things that is important for developing such partnerships. So that's when we are able to do that with these different combinatorial elements and run live or real-time, I'd say, optimization. That, I think, is extremely innovative when we do that. And another example is more from a game theoretical point of view, where we would apply a hybrid auction format, so a combination of an auction format with either another auction format, or it could be a combination with offline elements. So you could do a reverse English auction first to create this common value and bid compression, and also then say, okay, the top 3 or top 4 or top 5, whatever the number is, goes into a final round, and then the final round could be a Dutch auction, for example, or it could be an offline auction as well. And then you kind of get the best from both worlds. And when you get that hybrid component right, you can really, first of all, again, there are few things that you can't negotiate through such a process. And secondly, the results that you get when you really get the strategy right in those examples are absolutely fantastic and impressive. So I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to those things, because I absolutely love taking part in those discussions and sharing my input on how we should design it and put it together, even though on a day-to-day basis, it's mostly the team that would facilitate those discussions. But I insist on getting involved when I have the chance in these cases.
That's good. I mean, we love hearing them. So yeah, we're familiar a little bit with the hybrid, the combinatorial. I can imagine that's a huge time saving, efficiency gain as well, compared to the traditional process of all the back and forth of spreadsheets and the analysis that has to go on each round by round by round. Just doing it all real time online with all that optimization in place, the suppliers know immediately where they stand. I mean, what a time saving that would be.
And you're absolutely right. It's a huge time saver. But what we actually discussed when the team took me through it was, if we didn't have an auction tool, how would we do that? Across 30 suppliers, and some can take 8 and others can take 12, and you get 5 different bids per minute. You can't. There's no way without a solution that can facilitate both the competition and the optimization there. You simply can't do it. And then you cut corners and you simplify things so that you can cope with it from sort of a what do you call it, simply processing point of view. There's the limitation to the number of parameters we can process as a human brain. So I think you can actually run more objective and more fair processes when you do it like that, because it is based on these strategies that you set up front, and there are endless number of parameters that you can include in them, again, when you do it right and when you do it in an innovative way.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, I think we've bottomed out that topic quite nicely, so let's have a little look at what's next. I think we're very much right on time, so that's good. So let's see. Oh, the future of auctions. Maybe that's quite a good one to do on the back of innovation as well. So maybe back to yourself if you want to kick us off on that one, Jacob. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I write a bit about that in my book as well, and auctions as not e-auctions, but auctions as a method for solving sort of economic allocation problems has been around for 2,500 years or more. I believe the first auctions was for brides in the old Babylon. So I think the concept of doing things through auctions is well established, and I think it will still be around in the future as well. So I don't foresee that auctions will, and also e-auctions, by the way, will disappear, because there are simply markets which is just so where you need that real transparent competition. So there will always be a use case for e-auctions. But what I think is happening, or what I see is happening right now, which I think is extremely interesting, is that in the first 25 years of, you could say, the history of digital procurement, e-auctions was not completely the only solution, but had sort of the entire, at least when it comes to negotiations, it had the entire floor for itself as the only digital alternative to old school or traditional negotiations, I should say. And what is happening now is that it's getting a number of new playmates coming into that. And I think that's a positive thing, because it will drive a broader acceptance of digitization of the entire negotiation discipline. So when you see chatbot negotiation solutions coming in, when you see other digital formats of negotiation suddenly being available, I don't consider it a competition to eAuction. I actually consider it a supporter. It complements each other quite well, and it will, over time, these solutions in combination will carve out more and more of the scope from, you could say, traditional negotiation solutions. So I think they supplement each other well. I still think for at least the next 10 years, I more or less guarantee that any global or any procurement organization who is not applying auctions will, for the next also 10 years, be able to realize significant cost savings through e-auctions. So it's not going away. It will get a lot of playmates in terms of other types of technology. We'll hopefully also see AI sort of, which is making its way into procurement in many areas. That will come more and more into the auction area as well. So you don't have to spend 10 years learning auction strategy like I've done, but you'll get a solution that can maybe support you and help you, guide you towards how do you design the optimal auction strategy here. I think that's some of the things that will happen, but ultimately it'll just lead to more penetration, more digitization of negotiations, which I think is fantastic. So I think it has a bright future. And I think if the question was on one big idea, that would be this combination of market-driven negotiation with auctions and then with AI in different forms and shapes. I think that can really accelerate things not in 10 years, but in the next maybe 2-3 years time. So exciting time ahead for us.
I completely agree. I mean, I think we've started seeing it happen already, and particularly as, like, the new wave of procurement practitioners comes out, through whatever academic institution they might have come through, dare I say millennials or that kind of age bracket, but people are increasingly using technology, expecting technology, and I see it just become more and more commonplace to use AI and things like this to act as an enabler for your job, rather than to be fearful of it and think that no, let's remain in the traditional. Because I like you say, I do think some companies would then fall behind the times if they take that approach.
I actually believe it was Supply Chain Dive, I think it was that had done some research on it, or some kind of surveys that documented this tendency that millennials and younger people in general are simply just expecting that, a tender, why should I send 20 Excel sheets to suppliers, and why should I meet up to negotiate with them if I can do it all from my computer? They do everything from their phone. I can see that on my kids. There's nothing they can't do on their phone. and that's and they had I think that was very interesting because they had documented this increased tendency of just expecting that you do things digitally. And I can also see that, when we get a new young colleague, category analyst or something, nobody has told them that this can't be done, so then we just do it. It's the other end of the scale that is creating the limitations or the problems very often when they think they know it all and that things can't be done. So yeah, the time is also with us, if you could say it like that, in terms of digitalizing sourcing and negotiations.
It most certainly is, and I should just say as a disclaimer that Market Dojo does not e-auction any brides on our platform, but back with the Babylonian times. And from my side on the most the sort of the future of e-auctions here, I converge at the same concept as you, really, that the AI is going to play an increasing role. I mean, for a while now at Market Dojo, we've always thought about the poker concept of e-auctions, where in essence, you have suppliers around a virtual table and they can place their own chips that can be completely distinct and unique to the chips of another supplier. So, one supplier might sort of play their hand as saying, well, we've got brilliant account management. We'll give you, we'll give you 24/7 account management. We'll give you, a gold star support service with average response time of less than an hour. We will give you, 5-year warranty on our products. We'll give you free delivery, et cetera, et cetera. So they can sort of build up their own proposal in real time and present it forward. And then AI would be able to sort of gather up these different proposals from suppliers around the table, evaluate them, assess them, and then give the real-time feedback to each supplier as to how they stand. And it's important. This isn't something necessarily that I think can be done today, because whilst today we can build in parameters into our auction that do transformational bids and combinatorial logic, largely that's still dictated by the auction manager, saying what parameters you want to build into the process. Whereas this, I think, is more where suppliers can completely express whatever they like, just any valuable concept that they can put forward, any value proposition that AI can then evaluate in comparison to the other propositions around the table to give that real-time feedback, much like you'd have in a physical negotiation, where a supplier could just go completely left field and say, well, okay, forget that bid. What about if I actually, instead of offering you a hire car, I offer you a hire limousine? I know that's not what you're after, but actually this is the value that I can bring to it. So I think maybe there's something there around that, and around AI being able to enable that as well.
Absolutely.
So very cool. Let's see then. Last couple. Hopefully we'll still give everyone a bit of time for Q&A at the end, but let's see how we go on. Favorite e-auction. Excellent. Let's go. A nice, happy, positive one here. Again, Jacob, what about yourself? What's your favorite auction in
but if I look back, there is, and it's and I could only pick one. It would be the one that I also sort of open with in the book, where we sold off our North American headquarters. That entire process of meeting the investor is sort of explaining to them that what we call an online negotiation, what that would look like, doing the process, priming it, spending significant time also with the real estate broker, the local guy, understanding the market, setting the right strategy, and then ending up with a process which was just the result was just a huge success. Also, that combined with a just end-to-end positive, and for me, really inspiring and interesting process is something I'll always look back at as that would be my favorite process and auction as well, for sure.
Very good. And it was really interesting to read about that. And for me, I think it's an emotional one, because it would have to be the very first auction for Market Dojo. Back in 2010, when we what was it? Maybe 2011, when we first set up the company and built the first iteration of the product. And our first client was a 400 million pound manufacturing firm, and they kind of came in straight with an annual license of Market Dojo, and we were just on site doing the training, just taking a user through the platform. She had just started her job. It was day one of her job in the company, and the ops director, operational director of the company walked in on the meeting and said, "Right, guys, I've got the board meeting next week, and I want an auction running on the screen behind me as I do that meeting." It's like, okay, that's in 5 working days time. Okay, interesting. So we work with the person to identify a suitable category. In this case, it was factory consumables, the sort of oils and lubricants and nuts and bolts and things like that. It was only £25,000 worth of spend, so not a significant spend at all. Very much unmanaged. It was the kind of category of spend that no one really wanted to deal with. And they had 3 good bidders on this that were all kind of motivated to win some kind of contract and secure a supply. And so yeah, we got this together. We worked with the team there and got it all going. And 5 days later, that auction was up and running at that guy's board meeting. And in actual fact, we were invited on site where it was a classic kind of cinema style room, projector at the top, the auction up there, and I think there were like 20 or 30 people in the room. Myself and my other co-founders are sort of standing at the front, biting our fingernails, kind of thinking, this okay, this is a way to road test the software. Okay, better, I hope it works. And it did. It worked really well, and it was a great result. I can't remember how many bids, but there were lots and lots of bids. The client was delighted. They got well over sort of 25-30% saving on this, which paid for their annual license in that one small event. 5 working days, they got ROI on the software license.
But
that's
actually really good. Sorry for interrupting, Nick, but that's the funny thing, right? That we do that almost, I wouldn't say every week, but I think most companies could do that. It's one event, and then you'll pay for the annual subscription for an auction software. And from there, it's pure profit or pure cost savings, right?
Absolutely right. I mean, the second one that followed after that, like a few weeks later, was I think something like 40 or 50,000 pound saving. So immediately they were absolutely flying, doing really well. And so my advice on this stuff was, you don't have to boil the ocean. You don't have to go for the really big, really complex items to take to auction. Sometimes you can just prove the concept on something pretty small, pretty simple, pretty quick. And get that quick ROI and sort of a few notches of experience on your belt, because like I say, this lady, she'd never done an auction before, never even heard of an auction before, but she was fantastic, very capable, and delivered fantastic results, all within a very short time scale. So don't be afraid and take that leap.
Yeah, and again, I'd say we've done 10,000, and I've done it for more than 10 years, and we still do pilots quite often actually, because there's a new category manager and he's not sure that this works. So okay, then fine, let's do a small pilot to prove to you also that it works. Then we do it, it works, and then we can get back on track with sort of the normal cadence of things. So it's just part of it, that you'll always have to do pilots and start small. You don't have to start with the large, very complex spend, as you say. So I'm fully with you on that.
Absolutely. And what a great way to onboard new staff in the team as well. Give them something exciting and dynamic, and putting procurement on the map and delivering such great benefit. I think it's a real interesting concept to help attract and retain talent in the business, in the procurement team, compared to like, oh, here's your Excel spreadsheet and your Microsoft Office, Word document, put it together and email it out to suppliers, that's your job. It's like, no, let's bring it alive and do these dynamic negotiations that happen online. It's an important factor. Let's see, the next one up we have, I think it's the final one, in fact, Jacob, this has flown by. The most difficult stakeholder. Interesting. I think we've all met them.
Yeah. But if I'm to start on that one as well, Nick, then I think there'll probably be a lot of people who consider me a difficult stakeholder as well, which is fair enough. I know I'm not always easy to deal with, but I would say the most I've had a lot. But if I was to point one out, and I won't mention any names, and he has probably forgotten about it, but where I was close at losing it, it was again, it's some years back. We were doing an auction drive really across the company to really hammer through and home cost savings. And then I had a meeting with this head of a specific category, and I say, what's going on? We're not doing any auctions for your area. What's happening? Everybody, look around. Everybody else is doing it. Where are we with your area? And he just looked at me and said, you know what? We're too busy negotiating because there's a crisis and we have to renegotiate all our subcategories. So we haven't had time to look into eAuctions. And then I just get tired when people say that, and that is because that is exactly, there is this cartoon that there's a cartoon that I often use in trainings with a knight in shining armor with his sword, and he's ready to go out and fight the battle, and then his servant is pointing at him and saying, hey, there's a guy who want to talk to you. And behind the tent you have this guy standing with a machine gun. And he says, no, I don't have time to meet with some kind of random sales guy now because I have a battle to fight. So let me go with my sword out here. That stakeholder was exactly displaying that look beyond and look, maybe there's a shorter way to achieving our joint success here. I still believe he's not a fan of auctions today if I asked him. But nevertheless, at least sometimes we can have a bit of fun with it. But that was an example of a stakeholder where I made absolutely no progress with all my good and solid arguments. That's for sure.
Well, it's interesting. One sort of concept there that you mentioned that's quite interesting. I listened to the Google Center of Excellence podcast a few years back, and a process they do that I thought was really interesting is that they make sure to go around and interview and survey stakeholders who didn't take their areas of spend to auction. And by sounds of things, you clearly identified who these people were in the business who weren't doing auctions very often, and you also close that loop. You go back to these guys and say, look, why is this? Why not? And it's a really important process to kind of understand these objections, so you can prepare your dialogue and equally to sort of put across your case that, okay, maybe we're not going to do the auction this time around, the RFP is already out there or whatever it might be, but just working on that case for the next time it happens, the next contract renewal, the next negotiation, just to make sure that they are aware of your argument and why that they should consider it. So I think it's a really important piece to do that closing of the loop with the stakeholders, and to interview them that way.
Absolutely.
And so for me, I get on the last thing here, sadly. My most difficult stakeholder, I mean, again, I'll go back to my consulting days here, and it was for a national newspaper chain, actually, a national newspaper who the area of spend was their secondary logistics, the delivery of newspapers from the wholesalers to individual news agents around the country. And we were sitting in a big board meeting trying to sort of put across our case for how we're going to take this to market and a strategy for doing an auction. And the stakeholder pumped up saying, hey, no, we can't possibly do an auction on this. It's like, okay, hear your view. Yeah, what's up? Well, I mean, the suppliers that we work with today, I mean, only they really understand our business and what we need and expect. For example, this newsagent in let's say Loughborough, only my current supplier knows that you've got to drop the newspapers behind the wheelie bin, at number 16, because that's where I need the delivery. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's a fair point. Other suppliers aren't going to know that. So let's draw up the spec. If this is what is expected of these suppliers, let's make sure we have a really robust specification with all these different address points and what precisely is expected of each supplier should they win the business for that delivery. And so, that was the process we undertook with that stakeholder to really draw it all out. And lo and behold, we were then able to proceed with the auction, because every bid we had with the new suppliers, there was that confidence that the new supplier knew exactly what was required of them and to meet that service level. And so all of those bids were like with like, they were all qualified. And ultimately, it just then came down to just standard contract management of any chosen supplier to make sure that they fulfilled that service. And going back to your sort of comment earlier about common value, and suppliers pricing in risk, well, by detailing out that very, very thorough specification, that risk was taken off the table, so the suppliers could give their best offer and have to be confident that what exactly they're fulfilling. And so again, my takeaway for that one was just make sure your spec is absolutely down to the last bit of detail. That if the stakeholder has concerns about new suppliers not understanding what's required of them or not giving a like with like service level, just make sure it's absolutely clear and robust to any supplier so they know exactly what is expected of them. So very much recommend that.
Yeah, I fully agree.
Very good.
And it sounds so familiar when you mention these examples like this. It brings a lot of memories forward. So you're not alone in that.
Absolutely, we're not alone. Quite right. And brilliant. Well, we've got 8 minutes left, and I mean that has flown by. And I don't know anyone on the line who's there. You can take this opportunity now if you want to pop in any questions that you might have for us, or principally Jacob, perhaps. If you look on your GoToWebinar console there, you can see some the little box to ask some questions. I do see we have a few in here actually already, so let me just bring those up. So first one is, what are the 3 things to say to my manager why we should consider an eAuction? In other words, how would I sell eAuctions to the senior management team?
So first of all, cost savings. So you'll simply get a better result. I would also argue that you get a more efficient process. That would be the second point. And the third thing has to do with sort of the values around it, that this is more transparent. It's less subject to, you could say, personal preferences. So you get a more transparent, fair, and objective negotiation process. So cost savings, process efficiencies, and then fairness of the process would be the 3 main arguments that I would use.
Very good. Yeah, perfect, Jacob. Thank you. And we've got another one here on, can you please share the most common and the easiest category in terms of product or services for which a company can start using an eAuction? So you talked about pilots there, Jacob. I don't know if you have any particular trends as to, which areas you would typically start with.
But again, that's kind of part of my mantra, is that I don't look at individual categories. I look at markets. So I would always look at the market situation. What I would go for there is, of course, categories or markets allocations should be fairly simple. So a pretty straightforward, where it's not that difficult to spec out what you're buying. And then you should have a certain volume, so attractiveness of the business. And then, of course, you should have multiple suppliers. And I would say more is better. Our stat says that 9 is the optimal. So if you have somewhere between 5 and 9, then you're all good. If you only have 2 suppliers, you can do auctions. You can do very successful auctions, but it was the very first one. I would probably go with a category that has a bit more. because if you have two, it's only one who doesn't get it, and then you have a failure. If you have 5, 7, or 9 suppliers, there'll always be a few who sort of gets it and gets into the competitive process. So I would look at that. So volume, simplicity, and competition. And that can be depending on what business you're in. Then most companies would have that. And as you said, often it could be in the indirect space, because that's often considered sort of less dangerous to touch or challenge existing processes within.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I mean, we certainly see things like office supplies come through a lot because it is so non-critical to a business. But equally, machine parts and manufactured components come through quite a lot because they're quite easy to define, and there's typically quite a good market out there. So yeah, all sorts of categories. Maybe time for one or two more. We've got, do you think eAuctions suffer from being called eAuctions? Interesting question. Does it give the wrong impression to stakeholders and suppliers?
I think there's an excellent point with it, and it's a really good question. And it's also one of the reasons why I decided to spend weekends and nights for a little more than a year writing the book, putting together sort of all my thoughts on the subject. Because and what lies in the question is that auctions as such has a little bit of a bad name. And that's one of the things I would hopefully like to make just a small contribution with my book, to sort of improve the name of auctions so that it's less transactional. It has more credibility to it, because a lot of people have done auctions without commitment. So one of the things I really stress in the book is the definition of an e-auction. It's so important that both within a company, but also towards your suppliers, that you communicate what is an e-auction, how do we understand it. And in my book, if you don't have the word commitment in your definition of an e-auction, then it's not an auction. So it's an excellent question, and I also agree that it has there's a damage or a reputational damage to it. I don't know whether the solution is to change it. We have actually in some periods called it online negotiations, but then people look and say, online, what is an auction? Do you talk about an auction, or what is it? So I think it's more a matter of explaining it properly and ensure everybody understanding the concept in the same way and understands the opportunities. And again, that's really the message with my book, is that we'll still have discussions on it, but we're just slightly more informed or educated, all of us, by having access to more facts on it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we used to call them online negotiation events at Market Dojo, but likewise people were like, what's that? Is that an auction? Or so we kind of changed it. But just quickly to say, on your book, you can find it on Amazon, I take it, or just yourself directly, just pin yourself on LinkedIn.
So, yeah, of course, if you wanna get a copy, it's on Amazon. But if you want to get it for the procurement department as kind of part of a kickoff for a team event, or place a bulk order, then you're free to reach out, and then I'm also happy to give a small speech to the procurement team, sort of introducing it. So it's not only here's a book and then we'll leave it on the shelf, but you get a bit of a speech or an event from it as well. So and people can reach me on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to engage on discussing e-auctions.
Very brilliant. Thank you, Jacob. Do you have time to one more? Because there's just one question here about how do you avoid cost creep at the RFQ stage in anticipation of an auction? Don't know if you've got 30 seconds on that.
I'm actually less well. One way of doing it is, of course, to also have feedback in between RFQ rounds. But I'm actually often less concerned about it because the auction will take it down again afterwards. But another way is to institute a simple rule saying, guys, after the RFQ, we'll shortlist for final negotiations or auctions. So if you let cost creep in the RFQ and think you can protect yourself that way, you risk losing it all and you won't be invited. That would be the short answer to it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we are at the end now. That has flown by. Thank you so much, Jacob. Absolute pleasure. And to everyone still watching here, we'll prepare this up, and it will be emailed out onto YouTube, so you can watch it anytime you like. But please do feel free to contact Jacob, I guess, on LinkedIn, and take him up on that brilliant offer. But from my part, thank you so much, Jacob. Real pleasure. Very much enjoyed it.
Nick. Always a pleasure. All right. Bye.
All right. Bye for now.